Hello, and many thanks for joining us on the program People, Politics, and Power. I am Imoni Amarere. Political scientists loosely define democracy as a form of government where power is vested in the hands of the people. Democrats, on the other hand, either as political party or an individual, plays a role in a democratic system. Democracy extends beyond party affiliations to include civic participation and representation. In the aftermath of the 2023 general election and the many legal battles that have been and continue to be fought, politicians and non-politicians alike have unfairly been heaping so much blame on the judiciary for replacing the ballot box with court judgments and rulings. As at the last count, the fate of at least 3 state governors hang in the balance as they await the Supreme Court to determine their cases after they lost out at the lower courts. Several other legislators, both at federal and state levels, have already had their political dreams truncated by court judgments that invalidated their elections for one reason or the other, but chiefly on account of undemocratic practices in their various political parties and their refusal to observe electoral and party rules and regulations. The expectation in a democratic system is that those who aspire to partake in it must be willing and ready to play by the rules of the game. But that appears not to be the case in Nigeria, where political impunity reigns supreme, especially in the very institutions that are supposed to be the embodiments of democracy. Political impunity has manifested in various ways, including lack of internal party democracy, nepotism, disregard for party rules, impositions, and, of course, corruption. Now, could this be why an embittered former President Olusegun Obasanjo is saying that Western liberal democratic system of government has failed in Africa? Because according to him, it recognizes the views and serves the interests of only a few of the society to the exclusion of the general populace. Is Obasanjo correct in his assertion? Is democracy shortchanging the people, or are his operators the ones shortchanging the system? Can democracy serve its purpose of delivering service, effective and efficient representation without Democrats? How can the menace of political impunity in Nigeria be addressed? Well, to discuss this issue on the program today, I'm joined at the moment by a renowned political scientist, Professor Adele Jinadu. Professor Jinadu is a member of the Electoral Forum. He is also a senior fellow at Center for Democracy and Development. Was former National Commissioner, the National Electoral Commission, NEC, between 1987 and 1992. Thank you so much, Professor Jinadu, for finding time to join us.
Imoni, how are you? Good afternoon.
It's good to see you again,
happy
Prof.
Birthday to you. And happy birthday and congrats on your fellowship.
Thank you so much, sir.
Keep the sky is the limit for you. You have all the years ahead of you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, Prof. So
my pleasure.
Let's dive into some of the issues. You recall that as at the last count, there were over 1,209 petitions that arose from the concluded 2023 elections. And that, to some analysts, indicates that this is actually a very high number of petitions lying before the courts. And as we have seen over the past few months, we have seen situations where some of these petitions were either withdrawn, dismissed, thrown out, or in fact outrightly nullified by the various tribunals and courts. Is that an indication of the fact that our democracy is not getting it right at this point in time?
No, I would not go that far, because I hold the view that democracy is a process. It's not a question of whether you have it or you don't have it. It's a process, and it's not a terminus. Nobody knows the end, but it opens us possibilities. But what it also means is that while some are trying to move democracy forward, there are others who are trying to move it backwards. So you make progress, and that progress creates new problems. People are reacting, and there's some regression. So it's not so the two actually go together. The more progress you make, the more problematic democracy becomes, because there are people with entrenched interests who don't want it to move forward. So the issue then is that once you have opened the democracy body, the democracy bottle, the genie has come out, you cannot put it back in. And I think that is my own approach to this whole problem. And I think what we are seeing, to come to your question about the cases in courts, it simply shows the mess in which our politics, electoral politics is. And that mess is because of the irresponsibility of our political parties. I think we need to take a look at our political party system and see how we can make it more responsible, more responsive. And at the same time, we have to make our people realize that they should not leave the initiative to move democracy forward to our political parties, because our political parties have been taken over by anti-democratic forces. So they must, in fact, insist on the democratic process and the progress, and resist, and just don't take the politicians for granted. We must continue to raise questions. We must continue to take an interest in what is happening, instead of just blaming and blaming and blaming. No, we know what the problem is. The party system is in a mess. And how do we get it out of that? We can only get out of it if our people, the Nigerian citizen, the ordinary voter, now take a more active interest in politics and gets engaged, instead of just leaving things to the politicians to do, to keep on behaving the way they are behaving. So I think that is the summary for me. I think, one, yes, democracy has problems. It has problems everywhere. But that problem arises from the success of democracy itself, and the attempt of people to now go back to what was happening before democracy. So you have that tug of war between forces of democracy and those who are against democracy. This happens everywhere. But our own problem is that our party system has gone out of hand. This was not the idea of the party system that was reinvented first under the Murtala Mohammed and Obasanjo regime, and second after the Babangida regime. This was not what has simply happened is that the political parties and the political class in particular have not been able to hold themselves together, and they are in a disarray, and we are the ones who are suffering from it. But we are suffering from it because we have left the initiative to them. So there is time now for us to take away the initiative from them.
Yeah, Prof, you talked about, I want to harp on a particular word you used, the irresponsibility of the political parties and the political class, which has, of course, made many people to ask the question, can there be democracy without Democrats?
Well, we the people who are watching outside of the party system are the Democrats. And we must take the initiative away from them by making life more and more difficult for them. Asking questions, organizing collectively, and demanding. And I think in all of this also, I have a feeling that apart from the irresponsibility, and I use that word in a very, very descriptive term, as a descriptive term, not such an abusive term, but very, very descriptive. the same way you use the word incorrigible to describe a system or a person that, in spite of all attempts to reform him or her, has not reformed. And in fact, is getting worse and worse. It's simply a descriptive term to describe a situation, not an abusive term. You see, and I think, so what we need therefore to do is to take more and more interest in public matters and provide a voice that is an alternative to that of the political class. Unfortunately, you see, it's a difficult situation we find ourselves in. Unfortunately, those whose responsibility it is to call the political class to order have also not acted that role well, particularly the professional groups and the intellectuals. The mess in which we have found ourselves today will not be possible, in fact, will be impossible if we have maintained our professional ethics as lawyers, as intellectuals, but instead we have put our ethics to the backwards. And we are saying that, oh, there is no morality. There is morality in politics. Politics is about morality. You cannot separate morality from politics. And I think that is why we are mistaken. We cannot take morality from law. That is where we are mistaken. Law, the foundation of law is morality. The foundation of politics is morality. There may be dispute as to what constitutes morality from ages to ages, from age to age, among us and so on and so forth as Christians. But the point is that there are certain moral anchorings that we require and which must be devoked in our public political life. And we have not been able to make that connection between morality and politics. Instead, we are getting more and more concerned with the what I would call the rituals of politics, the letter of the politics, of the spirit of politics. We are getting more and more. Let me give you one example. I was told the other day by a friend who should know, and who in fact knows very well, that the reason why we've had this increase in number of litigation is simply because there are lawyers who see that elections have to be completed within a time frame between, let's say, within 180 days in total. So you have lawyers who are now going to politicians and say, look, I can take this case for you, even don't give me any money, I'll take it for you gratis. Because they know that the more cases they have before the Supreme Court, if it's going to end in the Supreme Court, then the more chances they have of becoming sons. So you have lawyers who are in fact pestering politicians who have lost cases to go to court, and I will do it for you free of charge. And why are they doing that? Because the more they know the case will end in the Supreme Court, and there's a time frame for cases to end in cases of elections, 180 days at most, so that they can then go and then end up at the Supreme Court. I appeared at the Supreme Court in this, and then that will be part of their curriculum and makes them ready to become, in terms of their candidature for SAN, make them qualified. Whereas other cases might go on for 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years. But the cases of elections must end within 180 days after the presidential election has been conducted. So I think that is the reason. It is not that the elections were badly conducted. It is simply because there are lawyers who are begging for case causes to take before the court as part of their marching on to become SAN.
You are saying, in other words, Prof, that the whole question of a democratic system does not lie with the practitioners alone, that is, the political parties and the politicians, but that all of us citizens are, in fact, responsible for the success or failure of a democratic system.
That is my point. In fact, that's why I like, Americans, the United States people, they have a way of aphorisms, government for the people, but they also have an important one. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance. Don't trust politicians, they are liars. They tell you one thing in public, they do something behind. Sometimes I listen to our politicians talking on television and moralizing. Oh, I've sworn to do this, I'm committed. But behind that facade is the reality. that what they say, they do the opposite of it in private. Yeah, and it's not only Nigerian politicians. Politicians everywhere do it. They give excuses. They give, all kinds of reasons for what they are. But the real reason, you need to probe behind it. So that is the whole point. You see somebody who you know is corrupt, gets on national, I'm going to fight corruption. Obviously, I mean, there is a whole gap between what he says and what we know that he does. So but we ourselves must know that, look, let me give you another example that I like to give. We know that the state government has failed us in many respects. They've not provided water, they've not provided good roads, they've not provided, and then communities tax themselves to do it. Now, but the most important aspect of all, that we have not left the Hobbesian world. We are still in a state of nature. And because we are in a state of nature and there is no state to keep us from one another from breaking the law and so on and so forth, we now organize ourselves to defend ourselves. So in Lagos, you have so many gated communities because government has failed us. Every day in Lagos, I go through traffic. Policemen are standing. People go through red lights. They go through red lights. So what I'm saying is that if we can set up vigilante groups in our communities at night, because the government has failed us and we are not sure we are safe in our houses at night, and we now organize groups to defend our property, our lives, and so on and so on, why can't we do that for politics, which is in fact the highest form of social organization? Why? In other countries, people make sure that politicians behave, and they have a way of doing it. So I think we need to do that. I mean, the civil society organizations, they're all dancing around the politicians as if their future lies in their hand. The politicians will make the laws we want them to make because they know that they will not comply with them. So every 4 years, the National Assembly starts with an electoral act they want to reform. They spend almost 4 years reforming the electoral law. And at the end of it, 3 or 4 months before the elections take place, they say they pass a new electoral bill. Every 4 years since 1999, go back to the records. We spent the whole 4 years of a National Assembly session trying to revise the electoral law. In other places, the Constitution simply says, look, the electoral body is in charge of conduct of elections. They make the regulations and so on and so forth. And if they need to amend it, they can then go. But here, this rigmarole there's a problem you want to solve by making a new law, but you make a new law, it is also so we cannot be going on that basis. How many times are we going to revise an electoral law if people keep on deliberately violating it? Parties cannot conduct primaries. We've said money flows, and look at the outcome of what we have now. So it is not a matter of the law, it's a matter of attitude. A matter of making sure that we can rule ourselves without all these so many laws we make. The laws are simply more and more confusing us. And see where we are today with the judiciary, with the political parties.
All right, Prof.
I remember going to a conference. Yeah.
Yes, Prof. We have been joined here in the studio now by Professor Yusuf Zaka, who is of the University of Abuja Political Science Department. Professor Zaka, thank you so much for finding time to join us.
Thank you.
Welcome. I'm sure you have listened to a bit of what Professor Adele Jinadu had to say, but our point of departure is the fact that it appears that our democracy and its effectiveness and efficiency is floundering a bit, especially since the outcome of the 2023 general elections, where we have seen a situation where over 1,209 petitions were laid before the various election petition tribunals, both at national and state levels, and the fact that some of these petitions were either withdrawn, some were dismissed, some others failed, and some others have gone to higher levels. And tongues have been wagging about the judiciary, but in actual fact, some point fingers at the political parties that have failed to do their due diligence in ensuring that they put up proper structures and systems for these elections.
Thank you. I think I will agree a lot to what Professor Ginedo has said. But I want to also stress the fact that, the institutions, whether it is the judiciary or the political parties, have failed in their responsibilities. Because if you have over 1,000 cases, because people are taking, some of these election issues that should have been concluded either within the political party, if the party had a system of operation. But most of them don't have any system of operation. The thing is, one individual is the chairman, everything revolves around him. And then maybe the organizing secretary or some other persons that submit names of individuals to INEC. Now, if the political parties themselves, quote unquote, if they are really parties, then they should be able to operate, they will have membership. We've discussing most of these things. They will have members. Members will be paying their dues, upon which the party itself will be properly organized. But in the absence of that, what we have now is, at the state level, the governors are the leaders of the party. So what is the position of the chairman of the party?
That was a system that was instituted by former President Olusegun Obasanjo when he became president in 1999 and assumed leadership of the PDP at that time, and automatically made state governors leaders of their political parties, and in the process sidetracking the elected leadership of the parties at various levels.
So you see, the parties have been captured by the executive. Now you go to the judiciary. Is it their business to begin to now say this one has won or that one has won? It's not their business. It's the business of INEC. And so therefore, instead of deciding cases in the courts, they will refer them back to INEC, because elections are not properly conducted. Of course, INEC will be praising itself that they've distributed materials on time, but the end result of it is that these elections are not properly conducted. And so therefore, elections should end at the polling unit. So why can't we just end this things at polling unit? When you have a situation where, I've seen recently, 8 people were accredited in a polling unit. At the end of the day, results that were now announced had over 200 people that had voted. So how do you arrive at that when only 8 people were accredited, which means you shouldn't have more than 8 persons votes.
Yeah.
So why do you not have that? And then you now say, go to court. So if the electoral body itself has its own problems, election results should end at the court. If you go to the internet and check for election cases, it's only Nigeria that will appear. Maybe United States because of Trump, and then India. Outside that, you don't see, it's not a trend, global trend that, you go to court. Why do you go to court? The elections are supposed to end at the polling unit. So we should be transparent, we should be accountable. All those things about good governance should be, all institutions should try and display that. As long as you are not accountable, collected money that you're going to use IREV, you're going to use BVAS, and then the court will now say, no, INEC can decide what they want to do. At the point of, announcing results, you decide what to do, when you have already told people, this is what I will do. So when the judiciary, people themselves, they are behaving as if they are not part of the society. For what reason? You now have cases where, in court, you said a governor has been removed. In your judgment, you say he's still the governor. So what sort of contradictions and all sorts of problems? That is not their business. The business for them to know if anything has been done wrongly by either in the political party. For instance, in 2007, they said Amechi, who didn't contest election, became a governor. When the candidate that went campaign and everything was Omehia, he was removed. That's the beginning of all these problems we are seeing today. Because the Supreme Court should have said, since Amechi is the right candidate for that election, and he didn't participate, and you cannot be saying it's the party, because people are voting for individuals. Go back and reconduct the elections. That would have been a solution.
But our laws today, both our constitution and the electoral law, clearly states that it is a party that sponsors a candidate for elections. That's one. The laws, as they are today, also recognizes that the judicial process is part of the electoral process.
Yeah, we understand that. But the point I'm making is that now you can see the involvement of the judiciary has that made the political system, because they can discipline these parties, even if the parties refuse to do the right thing. Instead of you now taking a decision that will now favor, because what you are doing, 3 people sit down and now decide who is the governor of a state. It's not right. Or who is the president. 7 people decide, read the petition from morning to night. That is not the right thing. The people, you can't just jettison the will of the people. People voted, for these individuals to be either governors, House of Rep, or whatever. So the judiciary cannot just sit down and be taking decisions. What I'm saying is that,
Are you suggesting an amendment or a change to the laws as they are today to ensure that elections begin and end with the Electoral Commission?
everything should end at the polling unit. If you have won, it's at the polling unit. You can't go elsewhere and say you are filing a case to challenge somebody's eligibility, challenge the election. All that is just a waste of time and resources. And we should be learning that, look, go to the internet and check which countries have this kind of crisis of election. That you now have over 1,000 plus cases arising from how many districts? 109 senators, 365 House of Rep members, 36 state governors. So how do you now have, and the House of Assemblies at the state level, you now have over 1,000 cases. Even the number of cases higher than the number of the positions that are supposed to be contested for. So when you have this kind of, crisis, and then every institution has its own role to play. There must be judicial reform. Reforms at the judicial level. You must reform not just the electoral laws, but the judicial reform, so that you don't need 180 days to do any election petition if we're a serious country. This thing should be determined within a very short period of time. You should be able to know what constitutes a flawed election. What constitutes a flawed election? If people cannot vote and the results are given at the polling unit, then you now go to the courts to get a result. Now I've seen somebody who took number 4 is governor, has been announced as number 1 because they did calculated. That's not their business. If there's a wrong calculation, send them back to the electoral body that's supposed to carry out that duty. They can't be shying away from their responsibility. Government will invest billions of naira for them to conduct elections. I don't know what's happened. You have all these cases, and nobody is being questioned. I mean, we should be serious about what we're doing in Nigeria.
All right, let's bring in Professor Jinadu again. Professor Jinadu, Professor Zwaka seems to think that the judiciary should actually play a back row, a very distant back row in the electoral process. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think that as it is today, the judiciary is part of the electoral process in Nigeria? That we cannot run away from at the moment. Should that change? Do you think that the judiciary should be shut out completely from the electoral process?
They cannot be shut out completely. They have a role to play. But the role they've been playing over the years, at least since 1999, has been one of more or less encouraging rascality by the political class. And that is why they're getting more and more involved. You see, in a place like the United States of America, for example, what the political class has refused to do, the courts intervene and make pronouncements to make them behave. And that is why you have sometimes they say the judiciary is not following separation of powers, that they are now moving into the legislative field, or they are doing this, that they are doing. But the point is that separation of powers is also as checks and powers. There is some element of fusion of powers there. So if the political class are not behaving, then the courts can make them behave. And to go give the particular example that he made, which I agree with, and which has been, in fact, stated by 2 judges of the Supreme Court, Aniagolu and Irikefe, a case before the Supreme Court on elections. They say it is not for the courts to start subtracting and adding and adding, that if an election is flawed, it is flawed. Let them go and do it again. Now, if the courts have been doing that, and they say the costs involved, the politicians will have behaved. They will have behaved. The courts are not going to stand for technicalities. When we know that, we know clearly that injustice has been done, and the judges are sworn to protect, to uphold justice, even when when the letter of the law violates it. People like Justice Oputa, like Justice Udo Udoma, have said that the role of the judiciary is not simply one of mechanically interpreting the law. They must make sure that it is faithful to justice, because the law, a particular law, can undermine justice. What you have sworn to protect is justice. So that is why Aniagolu and Irike Fefure say, like, look, if an election is flawed, it's flawed. Let them go and do it all over again. Now, if we've done that a couple of times, they will have realized. Let me give you another example. In 1999, I think, or thereabouts, the Supreme Court said, look, it is not the duty of INEC to restrict blah, 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 that there is a freedom of association, freedom of speech, and it is not for them to regulate, that they can register as many parties as possible. Now, after that, we had over almost 90 political parties coming in. But the idea was that the reform that was made in 1997 and by the Babangida regime in 1987 was to make parties national, make them national, not make them tribal or ethnic. And that was why you require them to show that they are on the ground in so many parts of the country. It's not just, they're not just an Abuja party or whatever. And that is why the whole concept of your joining your party at the not even at the state headquarters, at the ward level. You must join your party at the ward level. So the idea of a national party membership does not exist. It's membership at the ward level that you have. So the point I'm simply is that too liberal an interpretation of the law sometimes has encouraged politicians to, and that's why they say, go to the court, because they know that the courts will pamper to them by saying that, oh, let there be due process. That was the same reason why, the Wise Commission said that in as far back as 2007, all election cases must end before anybody is sworn in, either as president, as governor, member of the House of Assembly, or member of the National Assembly. Finish all elections before they are sworn in, and which is what is done in most parts of the world. There were times here when election cases, the most outstanding one, the embarrassing was the case, I think, in Plateau, when a governorship candidate, I can't remember his name now, the case in court challenging his winning the election did not end until after he had left office. What kind of justice is that? And the argument was that they go, look, there must be due process. Give them due process. Let them exhaust all the available blah blah blah. But there are people who are rascals who will use due process to frustrate due process properly understood. And of course, I accepting that by a strictly technical, mathematical. I remember once being in Tanzania, addressing a group of African parliamentarians. And at question time, they said, what kind of country is Nigeria? Where judges will sit down, then look at the votes. These are not valid votes. These are valid votes. We take this from this one. We add this to this one. Therefore, the loser is now the winner. And there have been, I think, again, so that is the situation. So I think by this technical approach to law, that violates the spirit of the law. People are mad, and so the courts have encouraged that. That is part of the reason why we see what is happening now. For example, I've been part of a discussion where it was insinuated that the reason why governorship elections now go to the Supreme Court is that the Supreme Court saw the amount of money flowing at the level of the governorship court. So let them come to us also and spend the money there. That was the reason why the judge of the Supreme, I don't know whether it is true or false, but that's the insinuation that and that law was easily amended. To now say governorship cases must now end up at the Supreme Court. It was not ending up there before. But the insinuation was that when they were seeing how much money was going down at that level, they said, oh, bring these cases up to us as well.
All right. Prof, let me bring in Professor Zwaka now. Prof, you must have been very abreast of recent developments when former President Olusegun Obasanjo said, I think it was in his library in Abeokuta a few days ago, that Western liberal democracy has failed in Africa, or has failed Africa. And he probably was referring to the situations that Professor Jinadu and yourself have painted here, where elections do not end with at the polling stations, but extends to the election tribunals and up to the Supreme Court in some cases before determining who has been elected by the people. Has Western liberal democracy actually failed, or is it the operators and practitioners that have failed the system?
You see, the Western liberal democracy has not failed. I think the problem we have, particularly in Africa, is the attitude, and you know Professor General made reference to that, the attitude of the practitioners. They are not in tune with, all the processes that you are supposed to, take in practicing liberal democracy. And if the one we have been discussing, the rule of law, is there fairness in everything they are doing, in dispensing justice? Are the elections free and fair? If they are not, then you take the political parties, do they really exist? They are not also existing. Then virtually all the things, the press, you now see the National Broadcasting Commission trying to sanction media houses, imposing fines on them because some guests have expressed certain positions that is antithetical to the government. And, so when you want to muzzle the press, is that really a democracy? Because you should have press freedom. Civil society must exist, not necessarily to support any political party, but to act as pressure on what the government is doing. If you look at what SERAP is doing now, for instance, trying to ask questions, on virtually everything, that's what a civil society is supposed to be doing. And then you find quite a number of them trying to also improve the practice of democracy. YAGA Africa, CDD, all those organizations trying to see, can there be improvement? Certainly you can't give up, because it's a whole journey that you can't say you have reached, your destination. But then the politicians must be willing. I've severally said that, that the politicians must have some national consensus on what they want to do. There must be an irreducible minimum in terms of what they want to do or provide to Nigerians. And they should have some kind of discussion with Nigerians. But as it is now, the politicians are on one side, they are in their own institutions, either in the executive or the legislature. The judiciary are also there in their own institution. Then Nigerians are now the ones that are completely having a kind of divorce between themselves and their government. And so you cannot say really that it's the practitioners that are the problem. If the parties can be organized properly as parties, and then they practice internal democracy and try to promote good governance within their own parties, that's to say that there's some level of inclusiveness of all groups within the party. You also try to ensure that there's transparency and accountability of party funds. Now elections are over. Have you heard them talking about what they collected from all these sales of forms? What did they use the money for? Is anybody asking them? That is why I think the problem we're having generally is that there are a number of very good reforms that have been done by the OAS panel that has recommended the setting of a political party commission. There should be a party commission. If you have a party commission, it will oversee the affairs of the political parties. And therefore, they cannot just be doing what they are doing now. They are doing all this because nobody is overseeing them. INEC, that is supposed to carry out that responsibility, is busy conducting election, going to court, and then when they now say, okay, as an independent institution, give us the copies of the results that you have used to announce winners, they refuse. Or they deny the result that is not their result. So when you begin to see this kind of, processes playing out, in either in the court, or it gives you some really worries that really, are we really a serious country? Are we heading towards something that we want to say that we're refining our system of governance so that it will address the needs and aspirations of people? When the government feels that, citizens must be punished, all sorts of taxations are imposed on the citizens, Now, every day they're not thinking, how do we make life a little bit more easier for the citizens? What they're thinking of, how do we impose all sorts of hardship on the citizens? So the citizen is at the receiving end. Government is thinking that they are operating as if the territory is a conquered territory. So it's a big problem, really. So our democracy, we cannot say that it is the model. But you can also see that if you have borrowed a model, one thing you can also do is to introduce your own local peculiarities. So if you have a Western model democracy that is not, you can't operate it the way it is. For instance, if you take the United States, you are told that even the president pays for certain things. But in Nigeria, it's enjoyment galore. You have virtually been pampered, treated as if everything must be paid for. So when you have that kind of position, of course, it's just luxury that you're going into. And therefore, you don't see any serious commitment in terms of addressing the needs of the people. But if they are paying for certain services or certain things that they're getting now, like the House of the National Assembly that are buying vehicles at 160 million per vehicle, when the actual cost in the factory is less than 100 million. All those type of things, are they really serious in terms of governance? So if you said you haven't won the election with all the crises of the electoral system itself, and you're now in office, can't you for once sit down and do the right thing that will benefit the people?
So, Prof, let's return to the political parties, which are very critical institutions of any democratic system. How do we go about reforming the political parties and ensuring that there is internal democracy with them? Because you cannot give what you don't have.
Certainly.
The political parties cannot provide democracy on a larger scale if there is no democracy in their own systems.
So what you need to, we have suggested, have a commission first that will oversee them, that will set standards for operation. Because you can't have a party that, if you take the prominent ones, APC, PDP, have they been able to hold national conventions where they will now elect their principal officers? No. All they do is that all sorts of schemings will go on, even after a convention has been conducted and the chairman has emerged. Schemings will go on, and then before you know what's happening, the chairman is forced to resign, and then somebody is appointed, and then there's no convention, and that's how they'll be going. So if you have a body that will oversee, in the first place, even the party membership, are their members. It's not for it to just come and give us figures. We are 50-something million size of party. We are 43 million or 45 million. That's the size of our party. Meanwhile, the total number of voters, look at the last election, 25 million. Then it means the foundation of even the parties is based on falsehood. And so you can't run a system like that. That the foundation, even the membership of your party, there are no members. So you must have a register. Who checks the register? Somebody should be able to inspect this, even do a sample of membership of the party. You say you have members in this is their number. Okay, fine. We can do a sample to know whether these people are really in existence at that ward or in that unit where you say you have this. So, but nobody is doing that. So they've been allowed to do what they like, and that's why you find all these problems, not really, things not moving straight the way they should. And I believe that unless there's somebody to oversee those activities, INEC is having so much in its hands that they need to really relinquish that aspect of party management and administration to another body that should oversee it. There's no organization, institution that is not being supervised. It's only the parties. The banks are being supervised. Everything is being supervised. If you take education, they are having different supervisors. They check from time to time, are they even operating based on standards, or are they just doing what they like? And they make sure if you are not doing the right thing, they withdraw your license for operating that program. So, and you find that if these banks, they try to see that they don't get into some conditions that put them in distress. So they try to check them and do the right things in terms of either changing the management or doing things that will ensure that they operate. So it's only the parties that don't have anybody overseeing them, so they do what they like.
No oversighting of any sort.
No oversighting.
All right, Professor Jinadu, I'd like to come to you on that. What can be done at this point in time to reform the political parties, to make them the democratic institutions that they ought to be?
It's a difficult question you have posed, because it's as difficult as asking, what can we do to make human beings obey the law? If they can get away without obeying the law, they will keep on doing it for as long as they can do it, But I think we need to have some kind of a phase. We need to look at it more strategically in terms of the short to the medium term and the long term. It's a long, long process to undo what has been done, but we have to start somehow or the other. And you mentioned the Ways Commission report. And one important point that was made in the Ways Commission report was the need for Nigerians to become more civic conscious, to know that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, not But that process will have to be a process of re-education that may take 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, even 50 years. But it has to start. It has to start. And I can see that it has started and feelings are already getting high, so that in the next 15, 20 years, nobody knows what will happen. But I'm sure it will happen, because once that idea is out of the bottle of democracy, you cannot put it back in. The second point that the Waste Commission also made, which I think is important, and that is related to this other one about making us responsible citizens ourselves, is that if you look at our constitutions, we talk more and more about rights. We don't talk about obligation of the citizen, about the duty of the citizen to the state. Some countries in Africa are doing that, and with some remarkable effect that, in spite of, you have a section that talk obligation and duties of the citizen, that you and I must take part in this. These are obligations. I think we need to move towards that level, point 2. But all those are in the medium to long term. But in the short term, the Waste Commission recommended what was attempted under the Babangida administration: have a Center for Democratic Studies, where you will have politicians, political parties, people, have them go for training, some kind of, sensitization and so on and so forth. It's not like what we now have today, like the National Orientation Agency. You see, National Orientation Agency cannot do that job because it is under the Ministry of Information, and it is doing political bid of whoever is in government in the day. But in a country like Ghana, they have what they call the National Civic Education Commission. And that is what, and they are the ones conscientizing the people as a commission set up by law, not as a unit of the ministry run by under a Minister of Information who can give instructions, who can say deny these people access to the television or so on. No. So what they were therefore is that let us now make this compulsory as in terms of our law, and they drafted an amendment to the Constitution to that effect. That's one good thing about the Waste Commission. Look, this will require constitutional amendment. This is what we are suggesting. But the political will is not there. So the question is, how do you generate this political will? My own answer is that whether they like it or not, they are only laying the groundwork for future politicians to be buried. Because once there is that seismic eruption, politicians will go. And that's what happens in other countries in terms of the struggle for democracy. Because they themselves are getting vicious and trying to stay in power by all means, and people are resisting. They are not going to. This is the beauty of democracy that as I was talking about, it's a struggle between those who want to move democracy forward and those who want to pull it back. And if we know from history, those who want to move it forward have always succeeded, although there are also reversals. And that is the old thing about democracy. It's a continuous struggle. It's not the kind of you are democratic or you're not democratic. It's a process, and that process continues as a kind of a struggle. So that is the way I look at it. Look, we need to start thinking of how we make our citizens better citizens than they are now. That is not going to come by law. It has to come by our emphasizing morality, our emphasizing family values, our religious people becoming more religious in terms of not become more and more materialistic, giving the wrong example to the rest of us that it pays to be, just as it pays to be a politician, it pays to be a pastor in terms of the affluence that comes with it. So we need, so there was just some element of modesty in the way we move around, some modesty, even the language of politics that we use. The language of politics, I see politicians getting on the board, preaching hate, telling lies, doing what they know they are not doing, but asking the rest of us to believe that they are doing it. Politicians do this everywhere, but it is left to us to say, no, we don't believe you any longer, and we want that to happen. So that it will involve changing our curriculum in our schools. I mean, it has to be a long, drawn-out process. We're looking ahead. See, and then the more immediate one is setting up this Center for Democratic Studies that the Waste Commission recommended, in terms of, and in some other countries, it happens. There was interparty IPAC was set up to bring the political parties together. No, the big parties don't go there. You hardly see PDP, you hardly see APC at these meetings, which we have attended some of them. It's only the short parties that are more or less proxies for the big ones that attend. So I think what my point is that this is something for every one of us to think about. And I think those of the intellectual class, the professional class, have a duty, because most of what the politicians are doing, they cannot do if the professional classes, the intellectuals, refuse to go along with them. Accountants, lawyers, teachers, and so on and so on. We connive with them, and we turn them into heroes, into saints, when they are really demons.
All right, thank you so much, Professor Adele Jinodu. Professor Zaka, let's wrap this up now. Professor Jinodu has suggested that perhaps the establishment of a Center for Democratic Studies, which used to be under the Babangida administration, headed then by the late Professor Moriye, could make some difference in reorientating the attitude and the mannerisms of our political parties and our politicians.
Yeah, I think 2 centers now, Mumbai in Kano is doing that, training of politicians. Then, of course, National Institute for Democratic and Legislative Studies. They used to be just for legislation, training the parliamentarians, but the law has expanded their scope to include democracy, training people on democracy. So I think in terms of institutions,
not necessarily the politicians and the political parties, because under the CDS,
yes,
political party officials and the politicians themselves were compulsorily trained under the SDP and NRC parties at that time.
Yes, but this one now is being done by the National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies. So the politicians, including the political parties, are supposed to benefit from one form of training or another, which will also help to, grow the democracy. But the problem with the politicians is whether they will be willing to attend or even to have time, And then, of course, the reorganization that is expected for them to make in their parties. They're supposed to have, departments, You have an organization where you have, people working. But if you don't give them tasks, you don't give them any duty for them to carry out, it becomes a problem, running that type of setup. So we find that even though they are formal organizations, but they are being run informally. And so that's the problem. So there's need for training and retraining of the political class, actually.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Professor Yusuf Zwaka teaches political science at the University of Abuja here in the nation's capital. And of course, we were joined by Professor Adele Jinodu, who is a member of the Electoral Forum and Senior Fellow, Center for Democracy and Development, CDD, a former National Commissioner of the National Electoral Commission, NEC, between 1987 and 1992. Professor Jinodu, thank you so much for your time on the program today. We do appreciate. And Professor Zwaka, thank you so much for coming all over here.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. All right, that's our program for today. Please join us again when we bring you a fresh edition of People, Politics, and Power. Until then, do have a wonderful weekend, and bye for now.